My wife left me for my boss. Now, I own his company. If someone had told me years ago that I would one day own the company I once dedicated my life to, I would have laughed. Back then, I was just another ambitious employee, grinding day and night to prove myself. I was convinced that if I worked hard enough, stayed loyal, and played by the rules, success would follow. I had a solid career at Holman Enterprises, a company led by Richard Holman, a self-made man who had built his empire from the ground up. I admired him. I respected him, and I wanted nothing more than to earn my place under his leadership. But life isn't fair to the naive, and I was as naive as they come, because while I was working late nights and sacrificing weekends, thinking I was building something meaningful, my wife, Lisa, was looking for an upgrade. Lisa and I had met in college, and she had always been different from anyone I had known. She was beautiful, intelligent, and driven. She wasn't just after a comfortable life. She wanted something bigger, something more. And I had promised her that one day, I would give her everything she dreamed of. I truly believed we were a team, that she saw the same future I did. But looking back, I now realize she was never waiting for me to succeed. She was waiting to see if I would succeed fast enough. And when she realized I wasn't rising at the speed she wanted, she found someone who was already at the top. The shift happened gradually. At first, it was subtle. Lisa asking more questions about my work, about the people I worked with, and, most importantly, about Richard Holman. I thought nothing of it. I assumed she was just interested in my life, in my career. But then came the changes. She started attending more social events, claiming they were for networking. She dressed differently, started wearing a new perfume, and spent more time on her phone than usual. I convinced myself it was nothing. After all, we were both busy. She had her career, I had mine. We were just in a phase, or so I thought. But something deep down told me otherwise. The late nights became more frequent. Her phone, which once sat on the counter freely, was now always face down. She was colder, distant. I tried to ignore it. I chalked it up to stress, to work, to the usual wear and tear of marriage. But I was lying to myself. The real gut punch came when Richard himself started treating me differently. Meetings I once attended were suddenly rescheduled without me. Projects I had worked hard on were given to someone else. The praise I had once received for my dedication disappeared, replaced with vague criticisms about needing to prove myself more. I didn't understand it at first. Had I done something wrong? Was I falling behind? And then one night, everything became clear. Lisa was at another networking event, and I was home late, reviewing some reports. I reached for my phone and, out of habit, checked our joint bank account. My stomach dropped when I saw a recent charge, a luxury hotel reservation, booked under Lisa's name. I stared at it for a long time, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. There was no mistake, no misunderstanding. I knew that hotel. It was the same one Richard Holman frequently used for business meetings and private affairs. A rush of emotions hit me all at once. Anger, betrayal, humiliation. But I didn't react. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about my wife cheating. This was something bigger. This was a game I hadn't even realized I was playing. And if Lisa and Richard thought I was just going to sit back and take it, they were dead wrong. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I was going to wait. Observe. Plan. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The moment I saw that hotel charge, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just the realization that Lisa had betrayed me. It was the understanding that she had been planning this for a long time. While I was working late nights to build a future for us, she had already decided I wasn't enough. And Richard, the man I had admired, the man I had dedicated years of my career to impress, he had seen me as nothing more than an obstacle to remove. I wanted to storm into that hotel, to catch them in the act, to make them pay right then and there. But I knew that wouldn't get me what I wanted. Instead, I played along. I didn't say a word to Lisa. I waited, and as I waited, the pieces started falling into place. Over the next few weeks, things at work took a sharp turn for the worse. My responsibilities were slowly stripped away. Reports I had worked on mysteriously disappeared. Meetings were rescheduled without me. Co-workers who once treated me as a rising star suddenly avoided eye contact, speaking to me in clipped tones, as if they knew something I didn't. Then came the warnings. We've noticed a drop in your performance, Gabriel. Some concerns have been raised about your ability to keep up with expectations. Maybe you should take some time off, refocus. The setup was almost too perfect. I wasn't being fired outright. I was being pushed, given the illusion of control, as if stepping away was my own choice. And Lisa? She played her part perfectly. She acted supportive, like a caring wife worried about my well-being. She suggested I take a break, that I deserved some rest. I almost laughed. She wasn't comforting me. She was waiting for me to crumble. She needed me to walk away so she wouldn't have to shove me herself. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction, but it didn't matter. The final blow came soon enough. Fired from my own future. It was a Friday afternoon when I was called into Richard's office. His assistant wouldn't meet my eyes as she led me in. Richard sat behind his massive desk, a mask of false sympathy plastered on his face. Lisa was there too. She sat off to the side, arms crossed, face unreadable. But she wasn't my wife in that moment. She was his. "We need to talk, Gabriel," Richard said. Sighing like this was difficult for him. "It's about your future here." I already knew. This was the moment they had been orchestrating. "You're firing me," I said flatly. Richard steepled his fingers. "Let's not call it that. It's just, things aren't working out the way we had hoped. We need someone who aligns better with the company's vision." I turned to Lisa. "And I assume that person is you." For the first time, she hesitated. A flicker of something crossed her face. Guilt, maybe. But it was gone just as fast. "This is for the best," she said simply. Richard slid a folder across the desk toward me. Inside, I found my severance package. Or at least, what they were calling one. The salary I was owed? Gone. The benefits? Revoked. The promotion I had worked for? Never going to happen. I had been erased. Cut out of my own future. And Lisa? She had known all along. The divorce I never saw coming. I walked home that day in a daze. I wasn't angry. I was seething. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was calculated, ruthless. Lisa had set this up perfectly, making sure I had nowhere to land. And when I stepped into our apartment, I realized just how deep her planning had gone. Waiting for me on the counter? Divorce papers. Not a note. Not a conversation. Just a contract. Like our marriage had been a business arrangement she was now terminating. And when I checked our joint bank accounts, drained. Everything I had saved, everything I had worked for, gone. Lisa had already moved on. She wasn't my wife anymore. Hell, she hadn't been for a long time. She was probably with Richard that very moment, celebrating. Meanwhile, I had nothing. No job, no money, no home. Because, of course, Lisa had filed for the apartment too. The courtroom beating. I tried to fight. Tried to tell the court what she had done, how she had been cheating for months. But Lisa knew how to play the game. She painted herself as the patient wife who had tried to save our marriage, but who had ultimately been with a husband who was unstable, paranoid, and emotionally unavailable. Richard testified on her behalf. Her lawyer ripped me apart. By the end of it, Lisa got heavy checkmark the apartment, heavy checkmark half of what little I had left, heavy checkmark a sympathetic courtroom that believed her lies. And me? I walked out of that courthouse with nothing but a duffel bag. I had never felt so small, so discarded, so replaced. Rock bottom. I moved into a tiny, roach-infested studio apartment on the other side of town. No furniture, no direction, just me, staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering how the hell I had ended up here. Lisa and Richard had won. They had taken everything, burned my future to the ground, and walked away without looking back. I should have been broken. I should have disappeared. But something inside me refused to die, because while they thought they had buried me, they had no idea that I was already planning my comeback. The comeback. There's a moment after you hit rock bottom when you realize that no one is coming to save you. No one cares that you were wronged. No one cares that you were betrayed. The world keeps spinning, and you're left alone, drowning in the wreckage of a life that was never really yours to begin with. I spent the first few months after the divorce in a haze. I took whatever work I could find, freelance gigs, consulting jobs, anything that kept me afloat. I barely scraped by, living paycheck to paycheck, renting a tiny apartment that felt more like a prison than a home. Meanwhile, Lisa and Richard were thriving, or at least, that's what they wanted the world to believe. They made public appearances, flaunted their relationship, attended high-profile events. Every now and then, I'd hear from old colleagues about how they were the new power couple of Holman Enterprises. Richard had fully embraced Lisa as his new partner, both personally and professionally, and she had stepped into her role seamlessly. I could have wallowed in that knowledge. I could have spent my nights drinking myself into oblivion, cursing their names, hating the world for how unfair it all was. But I didn't, because one thought kept me going: this isn't over. I didn't just want to get back on my feet. I didn't just want to move on. I wanted revenge. The first step, rebuilding. Getting back into the corporate world wasn't easy. Richard had made sure my reputation was damaged before he fired me. No major company wanted to take a chance on me, not after the way my exit from Holman Enterprises had been framed. I had no powerful friends, no safety net, no easy way back in. But I had something else. I had knowledge. I knew how Richard operated. I knew the company inside and out. I knew the weaknesses he didn't think anyone had noticed. And more importantly, I knew how to make myself valuable again. I started small, consulting for small firms, working behind the scenes, gaining connections in the industry. It took years, but little by little, I built a new reputation, one that had nothing to do with Richard Holman. I learned everything there was to know about corporate acquisitions, financial loopholes, and hostile takeovers. That's when I met Alan Price. The game changes. Alan Price was a former CEO who had been forced out of his own company by none other than Richard Holman. He knew exactly the kind of man Richard was, and he had been looking for a way to get back at him for years. Unlike me, Alan still had money and influence. What he didn't have: a plan. I gave him one. You want revenge? I asked him one night over drinks. Then stop thinking like an old CEO, trying to claw his way back in. Start thinking like a predator. So we became exactly that. With Alan's financial backing and my insider knowledge of Holman Enterprises, we started working in the shadows. We bought shares in secret, made connections with investors who had lost faith in Richard, and slowly built an empire that no one saw coming. And when the time was right, we struck. The takeover. Richard Holman built his company on power and illusion. He wasn't as invincible as he made people believe. And when we exposed that illusion for what it was, everything crumbled. Alan and I executed a hostile takeover, buying out a controlling interest in Holman Enterprises before Richard even realized what was happening. By the time the board called a vote, he was already finished. One day, he was the untouchable CEO. The next, he was out, forced to step down, stripped of his title, humiliated in front of the very people he had once commanded with arrogance. And me? I was sitting in his chair, the same chair where he had once told me I wasn't good enough. The same office where Lisa had stood beside him, watching me lose everything. Now it was all mine. Lisa's realization. Lisa stayed with Richard at first, but power is a fragile thing. And when Richard lost his empire, the cracks in their perfect relationship started to show. He wasn't the same man without his wealth and influence. And Lisa? She had never been in love with him. She had been in love with his status. I didn't have to do anything. I just sat back and watched as their world fell apart. Because I knew exactly what was coming next. Lisa was about to come crawling back, and I was going to make sure she never forgot what she had done. The ultimate revenge. Power shifts quickly in the corporate world. One day, you're at the top, untouchable, and the next, you're just another name in a history book that no one cares about. Richard Holman had spent decades building an empire, but the moment we pulled the rug from under him, he became a nobody. I watched it happen in real time. I watched as investors who once praised his vision suddenly acted like they had never supported him. I watched as his name disappeared from headlines, replaced with stories about his humiliating fall from power. I had taken everything from him: his title, his company, his reputation. And yet, the best part of my revenge was yet to come. Because while Richard had lost everything, Lisa was just beginning to realize that she had backed the wrong man. Lisa comes crawling back. It didn't take long. Only a few months after Richard's downfall, I got the first message from Lisa. "Hey, can we talk?" I ignored it. A week later, another. "I've been thinking a lot about us. I miss you." I almost laughed. She wasn't missing me. She was missing security. She had bet on Richard, convinced that he was the better option, that he would give her the lifestyle she always wanted. But now that he was broke, washed up, and irrelevant, suddenly, she was remembering the man she left behind. Then, one evening, as I was leaving the office, I saw her waiting by my car. She looked different. Still beautiful, still well put together, but there was a nervous energy about her. She wasn't as confident as she used to be. She hesitated before speaking, as if unsure of how to approach me. "Gabriel," she said softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I know I don't deserve your time, But can we talk? I leaned against the car, watching her. Talk about what? She bit her lip. Everything. Us. What happened? What happened? I repeated. You mean when you stabbed me in the back and threw me away like I was worthless? Lisa flinched, but she quickly recovered. I made a mistake, she admitted. I thought I was making the right choice at the time, but I see now that I was wrong. I was blinded by. She hesitated, searching for the right words. I thought Richard was the better option, but he's not you. I chuckled, shaking my head. Lisa, you didn't choose the wrong man. You chose exactly what you wanted, money and power. You just didn't think you'd lose them. She reached for my arm, her voice pleading. Gabriel, please. I miss you. I miss what we had. For a brief moment, I just stared at her. I let her hope. I let her think, for just a second, that there was even a chance I would take her back. Then I leaned in, lowering my voice. Lisa, you don't miss me. You miss what I could give you. And the best part? You will never have it again. Her face crumbled. You don't mean that, she whispered, shaking her head. I do, I said simply, stepping into my car. I didn't bother looking back. Lisa had made her choice years ago. Now, she would live with it. Richard's last stand. Lisa wasn't the only one who tried to crawl back into my life. A few weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number. Out of curiosity, I answered. Gabriel. I smirked. Richard, I was wondering when you'd call. There was a pause. Then, his voice came through, low and controlled. We need to talk. Face to face. Why would I waste my time on you? Because we can help each other, he said quickly. I have connections. I know things about this industry that you don't. We could work together. I let out a slow chuckle. You still don't get it, do you? You have nothing I need. His mask slipped. You think you're untouchable, boy? You think because you took my company, you've won? I built that empire. You just stole it. I let him rant. Let him spill out his bitterness. Then, when he finally stopped to breathe, I spoke. You're done, Richard, I said calmly. You lost. And you will never, never stand in my way again. I hung up. I never heard from him again. Final update, 1 year later. Lisa and Richard both faded into obscurity. Lisa tried to marry Rich again, but her reputation followed her. No man with real money wanted someone who had abandoned her husband the moment a better deal came along. Last I heard, she was struggling to keep up with the lifestyle she had once taken for granted. Richard? He lost everything. His assets, his reputation, his connections, gone. I heard through the grapevine that he had moved to another state, broke and bitter, blaming everyone but himself. As for me, I was thriving. I had taken everything they had stolen from me, multiplied it, and become untouchable. And the best part? I never had to lift a finger to destroy them. They did that all on their own. It's strange how quickly life can change. A few years ago, I was sitting in a cramped, run-down apartment, wondering how I had lost everything. Now, I wake up in a penthouse overlooking the city, running the very company I was once thrown out of. It still amazes me sometimes, not just because of how much I've gained, but because of how much I've left behind. Lisa and Richard were once the two most important people in my life. They shaped me, not just through their betrayal, but through what came after. They taught me that loyalty is a fragile thing, that trust is a weapon in the wrong hands, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply surviving, thriving, while your enemies fall apart. I didn't go looking for Richard's final downfall, but word travels fast in the corporate world. After losing Holman Enterprises, he tried to start fresh. Investors wouldn't touch him. Former colleagues refused his calls. His name became synonymous with failure, a cautionary tale about arrogance and overreach. He burned through whatever money he had left, and the last I heard, he had relocated to a smaller city, trying to run a failing consultancy firm. No one takes him seriously anymore. He used to be a king. Now, he's just another forgotten businessman trying to claw his way back to relevance. Lisa's descent was more poetic. She tried. I'll give her that. After I rejected her, she moved on to another wealthy man, hoping to land back in the lifestyle she had once enjoyed. But men like Richard don't like women with baggage, and Lisa had too much history to hide. She bounced from one short-lived relationship to another, each time with a man a little less wealthy, a little less generous, until she finally ran out of options. She downgraded apartments twice, then moved to a smaller city herself, likely trying to escape her past. A friend sent me a photo of her a few months ago. She looked fine, still beautiful, still well-dressed. But there was something different in her eyes. That spark was gone. Maybe she finally understood what she had lost. Or maybe she was just exhausted from chasing something that was never meant to last. Either way, she was no longer my concern. People ask me if I ever regretted not taking revenge in a more direct way. If I ever wished I had ruined them with my own hands. The answer is no. Because the best revenge is one you don't have to execute yourself. I didn't need to destroy them. They did that all on their own. All I had to do was move forward. And that's exactly what I did.